Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to Town Hall Seattle. My name's Bob Redmond. I'm the program director here and one of your co-hosts tonight. Thanks to all of our panelists, also to Seattle Channel, who is broadcasting live from this evening's event, to our viewing audience, and also to the people who helped get the word out for tonight, and especially to you, our in-person audience, for being here. So why are we here? As most of you know, the parking lot outside this hall was the site of one of the shootings that took place 19 days ago on May 30th. And as you all must know, that event was one among many incidents of violence before and since, including a shooting on June 8th at Rainier and Dearborn, and gunfire just last night in the Central District. A lot of us have a feeling that it's more than coincidence or that it's simply too much. In a city with so many resources, and if not resources, then innovation. And if not innovation, then at least capability, we have to ask, what are we not doing that we can do to stop it? So we framed tonight's topic as public safety, but more so than public safety, it's real peace that we are after. Pure and simply put, what are we not doing that we can do? So that's the question of this evening. How do we increase peace in Seattle right now? And of whom do we ask this question? At Town Hall, the center of our programming is civic conversation, and we want to ask this question of our civic leaders and policymakers, the mayor, the police chief, Public Safety Committee Chair Bruce Harrell. Also, we want to ask other community leaders and organizers, Mariko Lockhart of the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, Bill Hobson of DESC, and Rahwa Habte of One America in Hidmo. What is happening? What can we do, and what can you do now to address it? We also want to ask these questions of each other. Sometimes policy is not going to solve anything, and we all know that. So what do we do as a community? The title of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech in 1967 to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was called, "Where do we go from here?" And in fact, he said this: "Violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars." We'll return to that speech at the end of tonight's program, but right now I want to ask everybody to get in that spirit and practice nonviolence and understanding tonight while we're here. We want people to respect each other, the panelists, and the event that's been organized. Please be constructive in questions and comments. Please don't yell or shout. We're also asking people to write questions and comments on the other side of the pages that you have in your seats. This is so that we can take as many questions as possible from as many people as possible, and also so that the responses can be constructive. We're also taking questions from the live television audience at contact@seattlechannel.org, and we'll also be taking Twitter comments, #SafeSeattle. And if you want to email or tweet a comment or question from your seat, you're welcome to do that too. So the first half of this program will be a conversation led by Danny Westneat, columnist for the Seattle Times. And the second half will be your questions and questions from the TV audience. The outcomes we want to see tonight or hear are understanding information, the spirit of community, and concrete suggestions for how to be more peaceful and safe among ourselves. There's one last thing I want to say and introduce. This event is not a memorial. There have been some moving memorials, both outside here in our parking lot and also around the city. But we want to remember tonight all those who have been targets and victims of violence in Seattle this year, the occasion for this event. And so to begin this event and to honor and remember those people, we asked Joshua Roman, one-time principal cellist for the Seattle Symphony, and also the curator for Town Hall's Town Music Series, to play a brief piece of music for us. Joshua chose the Saraband from the Third Cello Suite by Johann Sebastian Bach. I welcome him out here to play, and then we'll begin our conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. And before I turn things over here to Danny Westneat, I want to say hello to everybody on the panel. On the sheet that you have, it has everybody's short bio. I'm not going to recite that or give long introductions just so we can get right into discussion. But I want to welcome Chief John Diaz here at the far left, Rawa Habte from One America, and also Hidmo Next. City Councilmember Bruce Harrell, who's the chairs the Public Safety Committee on the Seattle City Council. Bill Hobson from DESC, which some of you might know as the Downtown Emergency Services Center. Mariko Lockhart from Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Intervention Program. And Mayor Mike McGinn. To my direct left is Danny Westneat, and he's going to spend the next 40 minutes or so asking questions of our panel. Thank you all for being here.
All right, thank you. So it goes without saying that Seattle's been rattled by the gun violence this year. That's why you all are here. We can bandy about all the statistics we want, but deep down it has felt like it's escalating out of control. And almost as unnerving as that, to me, has been a sense that the leaders of the city, at least to me, haven't really explained what is really happening out there or why, which is a tall order, I know, but we've had some theories in the paper. Is it gang turf wars, proliferation of guns, a flood of ex-cons getting out of prison, breakdown of the social safety net? It's one reason Seattle is so anxious right now, I think, is that it feels like it's inexplicable. So I wanted to offer you this chance right off the top, starting with the police chief. Can you help us out here? What is going on in this city?
Thank you, Danny. That's a good way to start this conversation. It might help if I just put these 21 homicides in perspective. The other thing I need to first say is one is too many. Last year, we averaged about 20 homicides a year for a city our size, and that's compared to other cities, that's supposed to be very good. One's too many. So that's a statistic that nobody could feel good about if we have even one homicide. But I think it would help if I just talk very quickly about these 21 homicides. In 19 of the homicides to date, a handgun was used. In 2 of them, an edged weapon was used. In 9 of the incidents that resulted in 13 deaths, and this one's important, it was resulted from a prior or ongoing argument. So I'm talking about a bar fight, a girlfriend, boyfriend situation where there's a fight between 2 individuals. The coffee shop incident, of course, was one of those situations. 4 of the incidents that resulted in 5 deaths had some tie to narcotic sales or a robbery. Either it was a robbery at a marijuana grow, or it was a robbery that turned bad for narcotics. 2 of the incidents, the victims were not the intended target, and one of the incidents, we had no known motivating factor. One of the suspects had a valid concealed carry permit from Kittitas County. One of the suspects was on active Department of Correction monitoring. 4 of them were in inactive DOC status, and 5 of the suspects were not on any type of DOC status whatsoever. And in 8 of the situations, they're unknown at this point because we haven't found them. So in 10 of the situations, 5 of them had some prior history with the Department of Corrections. 5 of them did not. So that maybe helps put that in some context. The other issue that we're seeing is it's an older group of both victims and shooters, or victims and suspects. A few years ago, and I know Mariko will talk a bit about this, the issue we had was violence among young kids. And when I was saying kids, I was talking as young as 12, 13 years old. Both the victims and the suspects were much younger. When I ran the gang section, it was a much younger group. Now we're seeing an older group, and when I say older, it's from 19 to 35, 40 years old, a very different group that we're seeing. not a lot of gang tie-in. Some of them have been in the gang lifestyle, but that's not been the motivating factor for the shootings. So I'll stop here to at least give you all, this is what we're seeing. We're also seeing them in areas that traditionally we have not had this kind of violence. There are some areas that we do a lot of data review and data searches. I put officers out in these areas that we've had more violence, except in about half of these situations, it's been in areas that we haven't had this kind of violence in the past.
So this past weekend, I heard gunshots again from my house, which is near 35th and Union. And that piqued my interest. Okay, what went on Friday night? And so I looked it up. So I just wanted to bear with me, give you one example of what I think we're up against, because none of these shootings made the news, which is often the case. So this is all within a 10-block area of where Justin Ferrari was shot and killed a couple weeks ago. At 2:30 in the morning, this was 3 days ago, a group of young men was walking down Cherry Street with handguns yelling 74 Hoover and threatening nearby houses. Police were called out for that. 40 minutes later, 5 to 7 gunshots were fired near 32nd and Jefferson, which must have been the ones that I heard in my house. 40 minutes after that, someone drove by a house near 25th and Spring and strafed it with bullets. Then half an hour after that, a house at 18th and Howell was shot up in a drive-by shooting, possibly retaliatory for some of the earlier shootings I just mentioned. So first of all, this is insane.
We could all agree on that.
This is all from one night in one relatively small neighborhood. Police have said we don't have a gang problem, we have a gun problem. But given what I just described, just one little window and one little night, what can we possibly do to stop this? Anyone?
Yeah. Well, before we move on to some of the preventive things, let me tell you what we are doing from the police department side, but it can't be just us, and this is truly a community issue that we all need to work together on. It's an issue that government all needs to work together on. What we've been doing, and once again, the example I would give is that we need to change the culture of people feeling that they could solve all their problems by using weapons, and that's a cultural issue we need to shift on. The example that I give that it can't just be the police, because I am very proud of the men and women of this department and the work that they do, was what happened at the Folklife Festival. We had a situation, I had cops everywhere, all in full uniform, and we had a situation where there was a fight. Somebody felt pretty comfortable shooting into a crowd, trying to hit the other individual. Now, we caught him quickly, but just the fact that they didn't even give a second thought to doing that, that's what we need to be changing. I add a significant amount of officers every weekend to the various corridors in the city, and we're going to do that as long as we need to. And sorry about the budget, Mayor, but this is what we have to do, and he's given us our full blessing to do so. As summer, now that the school's coming out, we're going to be even adding additional people to that, but that's only to help try to stem some of the violence. It's still going to take much more than that at this point. But I can just tell you from the police side, we're using sting operations, we're bringing in our federal partners. We've ended up picking up over 400 guns this year. More people, unfortunately, are going to be going to jail for longer periods of times, but that's only one part of the issue. That's not going to be the solution to this issue.
So you mentioned changing the culture, which I imagine is not going to happen before the summer is out, right? But before we get into that, King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg said something today that struck me, where he said that the common denominator in every one of these isn't necessarily guns, it's guns in the wrong hands, right? So, given that having a gun in your hand is a constitutional right in this country, and the city can't pass its own gun laws, what can we do about guns in the wrong hands, even if we all agreed on a course of action?
I want to sort of weave in a direct response to that, a response to the earlier question as well, so if I could pull that one off. I think the direct answer, as far as I'm concerned, is that we have a very important law in the books, this RCW 941-290, and that's a law that suggests that a city like Seattle or Tacoma or Spokane, for that matter, cannot have a law that's more restrictive than the state. So we are, according to that law, required to have the same safety policies or regulatory scheme throughout the state. And people would say, well, that's a good thing, and I would suggest that that policy needs to be changed. And if it's not changed this year, we have to be loud and focused and committed to get that change such that we can have better we can have a direct influence on what's happening to our neighborhoods. And the point I wanted to make earlier was that many people in this city, people live in the zip code of 98118 or other parts of the city, that this is not new. That the gunfire you described, we've been making a lot of noise about this for a long time. What's happening now is that our worst nightmares are coming to fruition, that you're sitting and just enjoying a cup of coffee with friends and a gunman goes loose on you, or you're driving with your family, just driving, minding your own business, and you're hit with a bullet. These are our worst nightmares. Our city, I was just born a few blocks from here. I've been here a long time. You don't see the gray hairs because I put stuff in my hair so you can't see it. I've been around here for a while. And I'll tell you that this is not Seattle. We have incredible wealth around us, but this economic divide that's happened to this city, that we have folks that have done fairly well, but the impoverished, the poor, those without a voice, that there's the voice of despair here in this city. And so all of our policies have to recognize that this violence around us, in my opinion, is symptomatic of a much larger issue. So as we continue to get tough on crime, as we continue to ask our police officers, what do you need to do your job? Okay, we have to recognize also that there's a whole subclass of folks here that are impoverished and are in despair. And when a person is fearful and despair and has a propensity to violence, we are now seeing the symptoms of that. So our policies have to directly change that. You have to come up with a remedy to change those practices, that culture. That's the culture we need to change.
So we ran a rap in the Seattle Times, probably the first time we ever did that, right? By Prometheus Brown of Blue Scholars, who was making the point that this has all only gotten our attention now because it has suddenly pierced the wealthier, whiter parts of town. And his quote was, "Shots fired in the South End, nobody cares. Shots fired in the North End, everybody's scared." So, Mayor, are you the mayor of two cities? And is that part of the problem?
I wouldn't say we're two cities, but I would say that what Prometheus Brown was saying there has a lot of truth to it. And I think you acknowledged something similar in the article you wrote after the death of Justin Ferrari. Very much so. And I've made it a point to go to each one of the murder sites in town, oftentimes accompanied by one of the command staff, to get an explanation of what happened and why. I am now a student of the news, and I do see what gets reported and what doesn't get reported. And there is a difference. But at the same time, I want to say that one of the things that, after these shootings, one of the things that was hopeful to me was the number of people who were asking themselves, they weren't pointing the finger, they were saying, what can I do to make a difference? I really felt that sense from the community, that people were willing to take a new look at this and to take a new look at what they could do differently. And that, I think, has the opportunity to make us more one city, which is what we want to be. So I do think there's a difference. I think that what Bruce was saying is very, very true. And I want to go back to one of your questions, too. You know, the police, we will have police on the streets. They will enforce the laws. We will have prosecutors prosecuting the laws. But we have to figure out a way to reach people with guns in their hands and interrupt what they're doing before they take action. These individuals are not unknown to each other in the community, right? This is where the partnership with the community is so important. And one of the things in our youth violence prevention initiative is the street teams, the ability to get out and be connecting with kids where they are and be in a position when there's a shooting to try to interrupt a cycle of violence. The thing about our youth violence prevention initiative is it's been targeted to kids. And what we've seen in these murders, as the chief was saying, is it's not kids, it's men primarily, and we have to figure out how do we target that older age group. And again, enforcement matters, police presence matters, but that partnership with the community on identifying the individuals, who have the potential to engage in violence and figuring out how to interrupt the cycle of violence is hugely important. And I think that's the next level that we have to go to as a city in terms of what we fund and how we do our work.
Danny, before you comment, I want to remind the listening or viewing audience that you can email contact@seattlechannel.org to get your question presented to the panel, or you can tweet #SafeSeattle is your key to do that, and the audience right here can do the same.
So the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative was just mentioned, and for those that don't remember, we were at a similar moment of crisis 4 or 5 years ago where there was a rash of teenagers shooting other teenagers in Seattle. And in response, the city created that initiative, and Mariko Lockhart runs it. And so maybe we should move to that now. Is there anything to take away from that effort? I mean, first of all, did it work? And is there anything that we learned from that we could use now?
Thanks, Danny. Well, first, I wouldn't put it in the past tense that did it work or not, because obviously it's an ongoing concern and an ongoing issue. But I would say that we did some things new and different with the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. One of those is what the mayor referred to, our street outreach team, and we have a representative here in our audience. And street outreach is fairly new. It's being used throughout the country quite successfully. And it does utilize people who come from similar backgrounds to those that we're trying to reach. So in our case, we have a team of street outreach workers that are fairly young, and they have backgrounds similar to the young people that we're looking to reach out to and connect with. And they do have the credibility and the ability to build trust and relationships and to change young people's minds and change the paths that they're taking. And so we've really seen that in action, and that's one of the strategies that's new with the initiative. The other thing that I would call out in particular is that we made a point of having it be community-based. And so it is not an initiative that's really run out of my office. I don't have a team of staff. All of the staff are in the communities. They are based out of community-based organizations. So in each of the neighborhoods where youth violence has been and continues to be the highest, which is Southeast, Central, and Southwest Seattle, we have selected a community-based organization to be the lead and the hub, so that if you are in that neighborhood and you know a young person who needs that kind of help, you know where to go and you know it's in your neighborhood, and those are people that you are likely to have known for quite some time, who are trusted and will connect young people with services. So having it be community-based, I think, is key, and also that we've brought together both city agencies and community-based service providers to collaborate. So we're looking to break down silos to start communicating around the needs of each youth and creating a system that really is networked and coordinated and that shares information. So I think those are strong lessons that could be carried forward and expanded for a different age group.
Yeah, I was about to ask, so this works for 30-year-olds? I mean, it sounds like we're dealing with a whole different deal, right?
So street outreach is being used with a much older age group in cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Washington, D.C. I think we're fairly different in that we focused on youth, and I think community collaboration, there's no question that is a strategy that will work for any age group. It's an asset that every community needs.
And this is just a quick aside. I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and this was one of the significant topics of conversation. You know, our city is not alone in facing these challenges. And, you know, the mayors of Philadelphia, New Orleans, Baltimore, and others were discussing this type of outreach style that they were employing. And it's something that we need to take a close look at and see what would be applicable here in Seattle.
So I wanted to drag Bill Hobson into this by, I interviewed the father of the man who shot Gloria Leonidas right outside this building. And turns out he's a former gun dealer. He had a gun shop in Ellensburg. And he said, to his credit, as former gun dealer, that the laws in this state are so lenient when it comes to the mentally ill owning guns that, and this is a quote from him, you can be a raving street schizophrenic and they won't do anything about your guns. So is there something we could do about it?
Well, I don't possess the expertise of some of the people sitting on this table, so I don't know about our possibility of becoming more restrictive for mentally ill people owning guns. I clearly, as a provider of mental health treatment services, I clearly don't like the idea of people who aren't processing information in the same way that non-mentally ill people do, that have suppressed capacities for rational judgment, to be in possession of firearms. It's simply not an appropriate thing to do. But I'd actually like to take this opportunity to say something else. That just the way you characterize that, Danny, a raving schizophrenic could walk into a gun shop and buy a firearm, I think is part of the problem. With regard to mental illness and violence, I think the chief would agree that the vast majority of encounters that officers and SPD have with folks living with severe and persistent mental disorders are pretty low-level, minor kinds of events. They rarely involve something as dramatic as a cafe racer shooter. One of the problems, I think, about our understanding of mental illness is the media. If you'll forgive me, Danny. When your paper reports on mental disorder, it's invariably to cover a tragedy that was induced by untreated mental illness. I have yet to see an article in the Seattle Times or on seattlepi.com, occasionally see it in Crosscut, because there's a real advocate there in Judy Lightfoot, but no stories are written about the tens of thousands of Washingtonians living with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major clinical depression, who lead quiet, nonviolent, and frequently very productive lives. And you don't have to go back too far in the history of this community to find a King County executive who was courageous enough to come forth and say he was living with bipolar disorder. We don't cover stuff like that. So the public has this perception that mental illness equals danger. And that's really unfortunate. It not only doesn't contribute to any resolution of issues around mental illness, it actually obstructs resolutions. I'd like to see that turned around. I'm sorry I editorialized there, but
That's why you're here. So I wanted to bring up the police again. We've had some serious problems with excessive force being used by police from time to time. And on the other side of that, I wanted to read briefly from an email I got from a Seattle police officer responding to the rise in violence in the city. And so he said, this may be hard to take for some, but here's what he said. Beat cops know how crime works and how criminals think. Yet for some reason, the beat cop now is considered a thug who just likes to beat on people. We must be tamed, we must be controlled. Well, we are now tamed and controlled, and what has it led to? Crime rising, and it will continue to rise. Someday, maybe the public will want us to do our jobs again. So it feels to me like the city is in a bit of a crime crisis here, and we, the citizens, are getting victimized all over again by this kind of bureaucratic tug of war between the city and the federal government over how to properly be a cop. And so I want to hear from you guys, is this officer correct that we're seeing a rise in crime in part because of this struggle over police tactics? And when will you guys resolve this issue?
I guess I have to take that one. First of all, I would love to resolve this issue with the Department of Justice as soon as possible, because our officers do need very clear and direct guidance about what is and is not appropriate behavior, because we want them putting themselves in harm's way. We want them being assertive in terms of their policing in ways that also are absolutely respectful of the community that they serve. So this is something we wish to resolve. And we have, in fact, taken very seriously the concerns raised by the Department of Justice and begun instituting reforms without waiting for any type of formal agreement. But the flip side is that the agreements that are presented to us have public safety implications embedded within them too. You know, what is or is not appropriate actions matters. The budgetary implications matter because a very expensive consent decree with the budget we have. I'm proud of the fact that over 2 years we've dealt with serious budget deficits, and I have not cut the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. I have not cut the Human Services Division. I have not cut job training programs. We've expanded money for education through the Families in Education Levy, and these are long-term public safety issues, but we're still facing a deficit. So it's very important that we get an agreement with the Department of Justice that works. It works for reform, it works for our budget, and it works for public safety. And these are complex issues, and we're going to get it right.
So I feel like the core of the question, though, that this average citizen out there wants answered is this crisis being met in any way by the police, or are the police bollocksed up in a big bureaucratic feud? So, I mean, is this officer correct or is he not correct?
Could I handle that case? Let me, first of all, you'll see officers around this room today. And once again, I think each and every one of us should be proud of the work that they do. This situation with Cafe Racer was an example of that. I want you to think about what they did. We had a man mentally ill, shoots a half dozen people, and hundreds of officers didn't give a second thought into going into back alleys, basements, everywhere else looking for this individual. Didn't give it a second thought. I've been here for 32 years. I've seen incredible amounts of courage and dedication by our officers. I want to make that perfectly clear. They handle about 2,000 contacts a day. 700,000 plus contacts every year. And what we all expect is for them to be effective, but we also expect them to be just in how they do their business. And I'd say that the vast, overwhelming majority of the officers do exactly that. As the mayor said, we are going to work through these issues with the Department of Justice, but the spirit of every one of our officers, the heart that I see every single day, shows that they are putting themselves out, they're putting their lives on the line every single day to keep this place safe. And I think we've seen over and over again exact examples of that. Are people concerned? Do they want a straight policy and procedure for every contact? Yeah, that would be great, but it's also, we're dealing with people every single day, and we want to make sure, once again, that they're effective and that they're just. And I think we should be proud of the work that they do. And that's what I would say to the Department of Justice. That's what I have said to the Department of Justice. We are going to work through this, as the mayor has said.
Yes, Councilman.
So just to be blunt, as though I know how to be other way, to answer that question, whether our police are hamstrung or there's depolicing, they're not able to do their job, quite frankly, the only way I can get to that is to ask them and have a trusting relationship, to ask them what tools do they have, and in this current political environment, do they feel they are empowered to do their job? And quite frankly, I'm not hearing a lot of police officers saying, you know, by the way, I am not doing my job as aggressively, as effectively because of this. Officers like clarity of instruction and clarity of leadership. They want to know exactly what the parameters of their job will be, and then they will do their job. So as I hear this theory, it almost to me sort of, it prevents me from really getting at sort of the root causes. Marco talked about our youth violence prevention initiative. So we put about $3.5 million per year into the youth. And a lot of that is money well spent. I mean, it's anger management. These are middle school kids. This is the pipeline down into the future. And we're having incredible results there. The question we have to ask ourselves is, should we now invest more in other forms of prevention, strategically, with focus? But this notion of depolicing causing what happened in Cafe Racer, I don't get that argument. And I would also suggest that we love our youth here. I mean, if you look at our Families and Education Levy, our Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, we are investing in our youth. But I would also suggest that our laws dealing with gun possession by youth is incredibly inadequate. That our King County prosecutor, Dan Satterberg, is right that for a youth, if 13, 14, 15, to be caught with a gun, and for there to be very, very inadequate penalties for a third or fourth up to like a fifth time, that is inadequate, that these youth can be very, very dangerous at this age. And I think now we have the political climate such that we're showing our demonstration, our commitment, our love for our youth. But at the same time, I think we have to have a realization that we have to be tough on many of these youth as well. We haven't done that in the past. I think now is the time to do that.
Rawa, let me ask you, so at the paper, I keep hearing from people, usually in the central area or south end, who say in emails or in phone calls that they're thinking either moving away from the city or in some cases arming up to protect themselves. And since I've had at least one of those two thoughts myself, and I have no intention of doing either one of those things, but I think what they're really expressing is a sense of powerlessness. And so I wanted to ask you, beyond the usual, what we've been talking about here is like policies and laws and institutions and police departments. So beyond the usual, like calling 911 or organizing a block watch, is there anything that we, the people, can do?
I don't know what you, the people, can do, but let me try to answer this question anyway. So, as someone that, as someone that is a product of, an impoverished neighborhood, public housing, this, that, and the other, it was never, like police intervention or any policies that kept me from solving any issues or problems that I had with a gun, right? For me, it was a deep sense of community. It was adults and other, like positive influences in my life that helped me. And really, it was just, I would say it was a connection, right? And I think that, let's see. I think that we as a community have kind of lost that connection. So I grew up mostly in the Central District in West Seattle, in like the public housing with not a lot of money. But the great equalizer for myself and a lot of my community was education, was social services, and and I think since I was a child that there is not as much of an emphasis put on that, right? Education continues to be defunded. Mental health services continue to be defunded. Social services continue to be defunded. And as long as, I mean, it's going to take resources, money, and it's going to take time and real dedication to change anything, as well as kind of, you can't get away from the fact that a lot of institutional barriers exist, such as like racism and classism and xenophobia. And so, I don't know, I think we as a people need to find a connection with each other, right? I mean, that is the only thing that made a difference for myself. That is the only thing that has ever made a difference in anybody's life or anybody's community, right? It is feeling connected to the people around you, to the neighborhood around you, to really have a personal commitment that you are not going to harm yourself, that you have respect for yourself, respect for the area around you, respect for the other people around you, and that you're not going to cause any harm to them, whether it be using a gun or whether it be using your fist or whether it be using anything. And so, honestly, in all the work that I've done and in my own personal life, trying to really see other people, no matter, what they're coming with, and really, I don't know, it's really hard. It's a hard question to answer in a panel like this because everyone's coming with statistics and this, that, and the other. But really what it comes down to is...
We brought cheat notes.
I know, I'm like, I don't have any cheat notes.
Well, maybe the best place to ask is the people.
Yeah, what's that?
Maybe the people have some ideas on what
Well,
people
we're
think.
going to get to people's questions in 5 minutes. So this is the last 5 minutes.
But I do want to say,
Yeah.
all it is finding folks that know how to connect to the actual community that exists and finding ways to do that.
Rob?
I'm sorry, okay. So I communicate in a vastly different way than everybody, but I'm just going to end with this. I'm sorry, and I won't take up any more time. I could stay silent for the whole rest of the panel. So I'm going to use a proverb, okay? Yes, I am the East African on the panel that is going to use a proverb. There is a proverb in my country that, so man goes and buys a brand new pillow, right? A brand new white, lovely silk pillow. And after purchasing this brand new pillow, on the way home, he decides to put this pillow down in the dirt to take a nap, right? A lot of times we can have the resources and we can have the right idea, but if we are not completely invested or know how to actually get the pillow to, the bed. Does anybody understand what I'm saying on this panel? I'm sorry. We can have the resources and we can have the right ideas, but if we are not connected to reality, the reality of what it takes to get the pillow to, walk it to our house and get it to our bed, then I don't think that it's going to make much of a difference if we have resources and have good ideas, if we don't, have everything, all the things that we need in order to get it there.
I just just wanted to say the work that Rahway's done with HIDMO is, and you should, she's undercutting herself when she says she isn't sure what the community has done. At HIDMO, they have made it a point to bring together community members to mentor young people about what life can be for them. And that is, and I think that's kind of the point we're getting at here too. You know, we have laws. We have lots of laws saying what's illegal and what isn't illegal, but we have to reach people in order to change their behavior. And the way that happens is through the interpersonal connections.
Yeah. And I think that I just want to add, okay. I just want to add one thing. Even when we had the idea of HIDMO, it was so incredibly hard for us to get it up and off the ground. We did have issues with police. We did have issues with, you know, because they didn't quite understand what we were doing. What we were told, you know, from day one from the police and from Liquor Control Board, because we had a liquor license, was not to allow youth in the space, not to do hip-hop shows, not to do anything connected to hip-hop culture. And of course, we're a venue in the Central District, right? This is a culture that we come from. So there were a lot of things that we had to overcome in order to be a success. But in that first year, it wasn't easy for us, right? And so even folks with very good ideas and a connection to community and, you know, ideas to do wonderful things, I think a lot of times are undercut because there is a certain way to do things and a certain way that things are proven to be successful and other ways that they're not. And so I think that when people come with unique ideas or people with alternative ways to do positive things are not often recognized for these great ideas and these great solutions.
Thank you. I'd like to get into some questions from the House, which certainly does not mean, Danny, that you should be quiet. We want to hear your insight and some of your background research on some of these topics, too. And I also want to remind the audience watching through Seattle Channel that you can email your question to contact@seattlechannel.org, or you can submit your question to the panel on Twitter via #SafeSeattle. So here's one from the House right here at Town Hall first, and it kind of follows up on what Rahwa was saying. It's from Jacqueline, and she asks, how may we as concerned citizens become more proactive as opposed to reactive to prevent the rash of recent violence from occurring in the first place? So Mayor McGinn, at the beginning of the panel, you said that people were asking you what they can do, and I wonder what you told them, or if anybody else has a response to this question.
Sure. I think the first thing people should do is something that they're passionate about personally, because that means they'll keep doing it. And that's, you know, people have to look at that. You know, if it's gun control laws that speaks to you, if it's reading to a third grader, if it's mentoring an at-risk youth, and there's lots of people who are looking for people to engage. Even if it's just giving money to people that do it, because they can use the support. Do something that you will do, again, I think is the most important. But people naturally want to know also what is the most important thing I can do. They want to make sure that their efforts are productive. And I think that this is, in fact, one of the things that we're going to have to collectively have a conversation about and start picking out some things that are most important to work on and provide a space for people to enter. We've been working to do that, you know, we've been very much promoting mentorship programs for at-risk youth, very much promoting third grade reading. Those are things I mentioned. But this problem calls for more than that. I'd say most important, though, of all is that sense of community and getting engaged in your community on just a real level and getting out and getting to meet your neighbors, getting to know your neighbors, and starting to identify what you can do in your own neighborhood to make a difference.
Could if I could just also add, it really is about bringing a sense of community to each and every neighborhood. Last year, as an example, through Night Out, we had 1,300 neighborhoods across the city that ended up signing up for a block watch and for having a party. That was 1,300 neighborhoods that, and in many cases, many of the community members, this was the first time that they actually had met, even though they lived in the same neighborhood. This is something that we could change. We're going to be doing a big push on this year as a city. It's a national event, but it's something that we are really trying to take advantage of all those neighborhoods that took that first step, and we want to really keep them even more involved. We're bringing cops into darn near every type of venue that you could think of, whether it's we have these living room conversations. We're trying to, if you want one in your neighborhood, you call the precinct and we will have officers there. We'll bring food, and it's really to have these conversations and to try to build those connections, and that's what we need to continue to do. You're absolutely right. It's really about building community.
I just wanted to add, Danny, before you mentioned block watches as something like not that same old, but I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think what we're hearing here on the panel is that there are neighborhood structures in place that people can go to and connect and build from, and to build that sense of community. I think that is exactly the backbone that we've created through the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. It's a reweaving of that community. There's new ways to connect. We can use technology, but we do have to get out there and meet our neighbors and get to know the people in our communities, and I think those are the connections that Rawa was talking about. But it's possible to do. We have the structures in place. We have very strong neighborhoods and neighborhood institutions, and I don't think we should disregard them in their importance in this issue.
This is a stack of questions, and I know that we're only going to get to a portion of them. The man who just handed these to me is our communication director, Anthony, and he and I are going to talk about how to get these questions up on our website and continue the dialogue. Just so you know, we're not going to cover everything tonight, but we are committed to the dialogue. So part of the beauty of Twitter is that there's a preponderance of information and questions. So I'm going to read a few of those from Twitter right now, and these revolve around the issues of gun rights. So these are some of those. What is being done to protect the rights of citizens? Ask Danny Westneat how adding more laws will make it better. Use the ones on the books. Murder is still illegal, last I checked. Also, how can we stop those who want revenge when those around them protect them? So I guess we'll leave it at that. There's been a lot of emotional investment and really strong opinions on our own website and also in some of these questions. People are worried about their rights being taken away, and I guess, Councilmember Harrell, since you spoke about a couple of ideas that would limit rights of people to have guns, I wonder if you might respond to that.
Sure, I agree. Let's take some laws off the books. Let's start with 941-290. That's a good one to take off the book. What I don't fully...
What is that?
I'll explain that in a moment over the booze. What astounds me is how many wake-up calls does a city need? That a wake-up call, like what we've seen here in the last several months, is only good if people wake up, okay? And we're not waking up. And what I think the strongest Second Amendment advocates, what I don't think is fully resonating in this debate, this age-old debate, is we're really not trying to take anyone's gun away. We are a society of guns, a culture of guns. We are not a culture of gun safety. And so these laws, we're talking about gun safety. And so that law that I mentioned is that law I alluded to earlier when I said that cities do not have the ability to craft their own safety regulations. We have the same laws that we'll have in Ording, Washington, or Black Diamond, and what I am suggesting, without offending anyone's Second Amendment rights, that local jurisdictions are dealing with local issues, and they are different. By the way, if you look at our growth management plans, Seattle is the biggest city in the state. We all know that, and there are a few other larger cities getting fairly large at a rapid click. And so what we're suggesting is we have to come up with different kinds of regulatory schemes to address this issue, not offending anyone's Second Amendment rights.
I thought you had something to say. Is there anyone on the panel that wants to speak in favor of gun rights lobbyists?
Sure, I'll take that one too.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Since
No,
I'm
it
on
has
a
to be
roll,
asked.
that
No.
what, for example, on the juvenile enhancements, I think what is effective is when we actually partner with the Second Amendment rights to look at what kinds of safety regulations they would be interested in. That if there's, I believe there's a common ground. And what I don't want is the same old argument where the Second Amendment advocates or the NRA are over here and the people are over here and we're just talking at one another. And so for the next several months, I'll be working closely with those advocates to find out what we have in common. I can't imagine, for example, on the juvenile enhancement issues, why that wouldn't be a common ground that we both would want to consider. So I think we have to exhaust the common ground first.
Or the ease with which people living with major mental disorders secure firearms.
So I'll take a stab at defending gun rights as a non-gun owner. No, the concern that gun owners have is the source of the cases that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court were cities, the cities of Chicago and Washington, D.C., regulating gun control on a local level. And the Supreme Court, like it or not, ruled that they had essentially denied citizens in their cities their constitutional right to bear arms. So that is the law. I mean, it was granted a 5-4 decision, but those count just as good as 9-0 decisions. And so that's the reality facing you. And I don't think that the Supreme Court would have an issue with you punishing juveniles who commit gun crimes, for example. It's a completely different matter. But you can't restrict, you can't pass laws that are seen as restricting the fundamental constitutional right to carry a gun. You just can't.
That's what is known as a bad ruling, by the way.
So we can do, I mean, there are plenty of things that, you know, one of the laws that Bruce mentioned is that there's a state law that preempts us from taking action, and the Second Amendment should be sufficient without an additional state law that preempts us from taking action regulating guns. But having said that, you know, gun control, closing the gun show loophole, the assault weapons ban, any number of things, any number of things are absolutely worth doing. But we also can't wait for Olympia to change those laws in order for us to look at the actions we can take right now, because the politics of that just hasn't worked for us. I'm with Bruce, and you know, there should be a wake-up call. There should be a change in the laws in Olympia. People should stand up and change them, but at the same time, we have to start looking at what are the things we can do right now with our resources, with our people in our community to make a difference, and not rely solely on that. And that, I just want to make that point.
Thank you. Let's move on to a new topic, also controversial. Next year, 36 Seattle public elementary schools will not have a counselor. How does this fact relate to the violence in our city?
There's a direct correlation to the defunding of education and educational resources and violence in the city. I mean, I graduated from high school in 1996. Yes, I am a lot older than I look. And at the time, we had 4 counselors at my high school. Now we have 1 part-time counselor at the high school that I graduated from. And student enrollment has grown. I remember knowing the name of my counselor, her pulling me out of class, helping me to apply for colleges, apply for scholarships, etc. Anyway, there's a direct correlation, because when you do not have guidance counselors, when you do not have lots of other essential programs at your school, you are not getting the promised education that you're supposed to have, right? You're supposed, anyway, sorry, getting a little Anywho, but yes, I see more than, I don't know a lot about gun control. I'm neutral on the gun issue, honestly, the gun control issue. But what I'm not neutral about is education. I think that there is a direct correlation between folks not getting the proper promised education that they deserve from K through 12, and folks later on dropping out of school and, like being, whatever.
It would actually, when the chief was going through the 21 incidences, the thought occurred to me, I wonder how many of those folks were unable to finish high school for one reason or another. I totally agree. If we eviscerate the educational system in this country, we're going to see an even more direct correlation with violence.
I think education is one of the things that's a great equalizer in this country, right? The great equalizer is that people are able to have an education, at least from kindergarten to 12th grade. And the fact that we don't even have that anymore,
So here's another question. What are we offering our youth this summer during the school year? We know at least when they have school to go to, they're okay. But when the school doors are locked, what do you think will happen? Do we have any plans? Do people want to comment specifically? I think that everyone could agree that the lack of counselors in schools is going to hurt. But are there alternatives you can suggest that will fill that gap? Are there solutions that you want to propose or suggest that can help address the need of young people to have guidance?
I want to speak again to the role of the community. This past year, out of our office, this city doubled the Families in Education levy. So we will have more out-of-school time. We will have school-based health clinics. As the state's cutting education, we're looking to try to invest directly in our youth in this city. We make it a priority. But one of the things we looked at was what could we do above and beyond that? And we launched an attendance campaign, called it Be Here, Get There, which was how do we keep kids in school. It was a positive incentive-based campaign, and we actually saw improvements in, across the school district, and it built on the program that was in the school, and we did it basically on a shoestring. We did it with contributions from people, we did it with volunteer time, we did it with creating a culture that it was important for kids to be in school. And trying to get Olympia to figure out how it's going to meet its constitutional mandate to fund education is a worthy cause. And this city stands up for that every year and asks them to do that. But they haven't done it yet, right? But what can we do right here, right now, in our community with our folks? And there are lots of people that are running summer programs who are desperate for volunteers to help them. There are lots of nonprofits that are desperate for more money to support their programs. And these are programs that are right here, right now, that can make a difference this summer. And that's what I'd urge people to get engaged in, because that strength, the reweaving of the community that Mariko spoke about, that's real.
Here's an interesting question. I have read that other cities have reduced violence by setting up gang-free areas, similar to drug-free and prostitution-free areas. Could Seattle look into this and perhaps try it?
Well, I wanted to say, the statistics that the chief shared earlier indicate that gangs are not the primary issue here. And also that Seattle is not like those cities. Some cities that, around the country, like Chicago and LA, have deeply entrenched gang territories where having a gang-free zone makes sense because so many areas of the city are truly controlled by gangs. That's not the case here in Seattle. We have a different dynamic. It's very fluid. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to choose a zone that would be gang-free. It's a different situation. And again, the violence that we're seeing is we're not experiencing a gang war. These are not turf wars. This is not one gang rising up against the other. Some of the people who have been involved in the shootings this year have been gang involved, but that does not make it a gang turf issue. So I think the gang-free zone is not really applicable to our city.
Here's a question from the floor, from the House, and also from email. Both of them are about race. The first question from the House says, many people I know don't trust the Seattle police force and sometimes object to police presence at community events and in their neighborhoods. Do you have any ideas on how to increase trust between citizens and the Seattle Police Department? And then related, in terms of connecting with communities from email, where are the young Black and Latino men in the audience today? How do you intend to reach them? Will you schedule a meeting?
Yes, let's schedule a meeting. That's not a problem.
Yeah. And could I hit that very first one? It goes back to some of my first comments about the issue of effective and just policing. We are trying a vast variety of different ways to try to deal with how do we work closely with our community. Everything from our summer teen employment thing, we have officers and we have teens that are working in the precincts this year. We have school emphasis officers that that work in some of the high schools and middle schools. We're trying a lot of different approaches, including we have an Explorer program that hits youth from 13 to 21 years old. We have a chess club that Cookie Bolden does. From 40 to 60 youth meet every Saturday to work on chess. We have officers at the late night program. We're doing donut dialogues where we bring officers and youth together to talk. And it really is just that simple and that hard. And that's really working with each of our communities to build that trust. That's why I talked about those living room conversations. We completely retooled how we deploy our officers so we could get back to having that one officer in that one neighborhood again, and so that we could try to build that connection each and every day. It's ongoing, it's hard work, and you take several steps forward. You have an incident, a high-profile incident, it seems like you almost start over again. But that being said, we're trying a number of different programs, and we're more than willing to try something very innovative. I think you said something about, we don't try things unless it's done a certain way. Well, we've thrown that mold out completely. We are trying completely different things. We're working with academics and practitioners from throughout the country to try virtually. I'll try any new idea just to see if it will gain us some ground in this area. And we're doing a lot of those type of issues. So it's going to take hard work to continue.
Yeah, I think that obviously there's a lot of institutional issues happening that keeps a lot of people from trusting police, going to police when issues arise, right? The police are going to be some people's very, very, very last resorts, even when violence is being instituted upon them. Even in violent incidents, there are many people that are not going to go to the police. So I do think that alternative models need to be tried. Community policing, community accountability there are a lot of different things that we can try aside from more policing in areas or with communities that don't trust police.
This is a similar question, but it speaks to the importance of this question for people in the audience and also in the city. And specifically something that you talked about, Mayor McGinn, with the police department's issues with the Department of Justice right now. And I'd like you to comment on it. The question is, how do we encourage individuals in our community to respect and uphold public safety when they may not feel that their individual safety is a right respected by our community? Refer, please, to my Coco Alley Barnes and John T. Williams. Are we asking for something that we aren't offering?
That's a good question, and a fair one, because the police's effectiveness is tied entirely to, the trust and respect they have within the community. They represent community values about what is or is not acceptable behavior, and without the trust of the community, their effectiveness is compromised. I will say this about the shooting of John T. Williams. The police department, in its review, found it was an unjustified shooting. That was not something that was done by the county prosecutor or the U.S. Department of Justice. Nobody else chose to prosecute that or pursue that, but the police examined it themselves, found it was wrong, found it was unjustified, and we've resolved that and settled that lawsuit as well against the city. And I think the police department takes seriously its duty to police itself and to live up to those standards. And that's that's not just my direction to the chief. I want to make it very clear. That's the chief's direction to his officers, that in every contact we have with the public, we have to build trust, because that is what our effectiveness depends upon. And I know this chief takes very seriously the duty to respond to any complaint of wrongdoing and remedy it.
Could I add something to that too, Bob? Mr. Williams was a resident in one of our housing projects, and before that he'd been a shelter client. And naturally we followed that case fairly closely, and that young officer effectively stopped being a law enforcement officer in the city of Seattle within an hour to 2 hours after the unfortunate death of John T. Williams. His badge was taken from him, his gun was taken from him, he was placed on administrative leave. I personally couldn't ask for a better response from SPD in the handling of that. I can't comment about, and I don't think anybody can comment about what that young man saw that was threatening by a fairly incapacitated individual like Mr. Williams was, who had many challenges in his life. I would like to go on. DOJ report has come up a couple of times, and I've read it several times now, and I'm not in a position to have any information or expertise in regard to the allegations of unjustified force against people of color. That's not my bailiwick, but the allegation about unjustified force used toward mentally ill is my bailiwick, and I do have an opinion. The Department of Justice didn't interview one mental health organization when it was compiling the data that informed the report. I was very disappointed to discover that. I've actually talked with a couple of people in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Seattle about why that oversight. Why wouldn't you go to people that are directly dealing with mentally ill folks on a daily basis, many of whom do have encounters with the police, and they admitted that it was probably a lapse in their judgment. When I said that SPD has a lot of encounters with mentally ill in the community, I was basically talking about the organization I work for. If the day was an average day at DESC, we served about 2,100 people in all of the different programs. And a little over 90% of those folks are living with major psychiatric disabilities and addictions problems, or both. And a very significant portion of the encounters of the Seattle Police Department with mentally ill people on the streets of this community involve consumers in the organization I work for. And I have to tell you that I and my staff are pretty uniformly appreciative of SPD, the sensitivity with which they handle mental illness, the increasing sophistication with which they handle mental illness, and the opportunity that they offer to organizations for kind of working together around shared goals. At the end of the day, a homeless service organization like DESC has one overarching objective. We want to get homeless people off the street. That is an overarching objective of the Seattle Police Department. We share a common goal. We work together collaboratively. None of that is mentioned in the DOJ report, and I think it's a tremendous oversight on the part of the Department of Justice.
Thank you. And given what some of the panelists have said, there's a communications issue and a trust issue. I know a lot of members of Town Hall or people who have commented on our site, and the general tenor of the city over the past 6 to 8 months has been that they don't see what you're talking about, Bill. But let's I have a question for you, Danny, because if there's a communication issue, I want to ask you about the media's role in presenting stories and telling stories that kind of get people to expect certain things. And, you know, if it bleeds, it leads is a practice that people recognize, maybe not codified in the media, but what can you say about the media's role in telling stories that counter the trend of violence or that promote cooperation among people in the city?
Well, I mean, we tell them every day, but when there's the level of shooting that's been going on in this city recently, we also feel compelled to talk about that. And so I'm not sure if your question was about treatment of the mentally ill or about if it bleeds, it leads. But we, you know, at the Seattle Times, we don't run tons of crime stories on the front page, for example, partly because we want to counter a lot of what is seen on the nightly television news, which is just one crime story after another. But, you know, my bias on this is, again, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but I already admitted it in the paper, so I'll do it again here, which is that when Justin Ferrari was shot, he was essentially me in terms of demographic profile. We're basically the same age, we went to the same university, we have 2 kids, we live in the same neighborhood. And so when he was shot, I had, you know, one of those epiphanies that the rest of you have when someone who is like you gets shot. And I thought, my God, how could this happen? What's going on? And so I looked into what's been going on that block over the course of the last year, and it turns out there's a shooting every month there. And this is 10 blocks from my house. And I didn't really know it. I mean, I knew about some of them. And so none of those other shootings were in the newspaper.
So you're saying that...
So I'm actually saying that this issue is undercover. People don't really even know what's going on in the city.
Does anyone else want to comment on that?
You know, so I was first few months in office, and every morning I get a briefing from the police department about what's happened. And one of the first things that came up was relatively early on, theft on a bus at Rainier Beach, down in Rainier Beach, involving a gun and a backpack, and it included a 10-year-old having the gun. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, this is going to explode in the media, 10-year-old with a gun down in Rainier Beach. I had a 10-year-old son at the time. He's now 12. That's how come I know it was 2 years ago. And nobody asked me about it. I went through the whole day. I did my media. Nobody asked me about it. I was fully briefed. I was ready to talk about it. So that, to me, was my first, you know, that was the first time I just saw it right up front, right in front of me as a mayor, that some things get covered, some things don't, you know, and that's a real challenge. And that's, I think, again, I want to go back to what this moment is that we had in this city, right? For a moment, man, it was all out there. I went down to Garfield. Paul here did yeoman's work moderating that. There was a lot of emotion out there at Garfield last night, that night. And it was, you know, I do town halls all over town. I go to the south end, I go to the north end, and people talk about different things in these town halls. But for one night, everybody was in the same room, talking to each other about the same topic. And in that, I just want to say again, as devastating and tragic as these murders are, that it seems like this is a moment where we are all prepared to communicate with each other about this topic. And I believe there's hope in there.
So we have less than 10 minutes left, and as we're beginning to wrap up this part of our community dialogue, I'd like to make sure that we get concrete suggestions from people. Here are a couple of questions that might help focus that. This one from Anthony from email. Is there any thought about offering community self-awareness courses similar to what the group Home Alive created after the tragic episode, the violent attack of Mia Zapata? the attack in South Park or the massacre on Capitol Hill a few years ago. And here's another question, which I think might have been asked to promote gun rights, but listen to the essence of this question. Why the emphasis on gun violence? Long before guns came into play, violence has already occurred. The basic problem is violence. Let us discuss the basis of that problem rather than distractedly focus on the tools of violence. Don't treat the symptoms. Why not treat the cause? And then, finally, this plea: who has to die for this community to stand up and say no more? And concretely, what will it take to prevent this slaughter from continuing? So how about some suggestions or concrete steps that we can take right now, both you and also people in the audience?
Well, once again, what we've been doing in the immediate, and we'll keep putting resources at it, and we'll help to limit some of the violence by doing this, has been the adding of additional officers throughout the city. I mean, we just have to do that. There are some immediate steps that we could take without getting into the whole gun rights issue, but it's education on safe gun storage. This year so far, we've had about 90 guns that were stolen either in a burglary or in a car prowl. That in itself, those are 90 guns that are out in the street that could cause us issues. That's something we could just do through community education as an example. We've been working with, we're one of the few departments in the country that has a mental health professional, and we need to continue to figure out ways to keep that position funded. It's through a grant at this point. That individual goes out and works with people that constantly are in need, that are in crisis, that are out there, and that potentially have issues that could be of concern to the community. He's handled about 256 cases since he's come on board, and he's been able to successfully complete 200 or almost 200 of those just by going in and working with the individual, getting services for him, things like that. Those are things that we could do in the immediate. What we're doing on the area of public trust, it's all about how we communicate, how we make each and every one of our stops, and that's something that I'm committed to. The plan that we're using, which is a procedural justice training program that came out of Tom Tyler's work in New York, is not only going to be used here, but it's going to be, I'm proud of the fact that now the state academy is going to be training every officer in that type of training. So that's going to be helpful in the immediate. So we'll continue to use a data-driven approach to try to put officers in the right area. That's going to help to some extent, but it really is continuing to make those connections in each and every one of those communities. We have a chance with these block watches, with what's coming out with Night Out, to try to really connect even more people together.
Thank you, Chief Diaz. And I'd actually like to hear from everybody on this topic, and to do that, let's keep it to 30 seconds, and we'll just keep coming down the line here. Rawa, what personally can you do or will you do to increase peace and public safety in Seattle?
Sure, I think that what I and what everyone that is a citizen can do is vote, and vote your values. Don't stand for education continuing to get cut. Don't stand for mental health services to continue to get cut. Don't stand for human services to continue to get cut, because if you really want to get to the root of violence and the root of all these things that we're talking about, you really need to get civically engaged, right? You can't just sit by while all these services are getting cut and then complain when, when a rash of violence occurs. And the other thing you can do, obviously, is volunteer. Get involved in your community. If you don't have time to volunteer, donate to causes in your community. Get to know, as easy as getting to know your neighbors and building a sense of community in your neighborhood. I think those are easy things that anyone can do to really get to the root of violence and misunderstanding that happens in our neighborhoods.
So one thing I would suggest is join your police advisory committee, your council, just to have this kind of discussion. Informal, we're working with police officers, working with neighborhood folks, just trying to figure out what can we do together to make our neighborhoods safe. Second, government can't do this alone. It would be foolish if we thought that. I'm coming up with an idea that the mayor and I have sat down, and I call it saving streets and saving souls, where we couple with mentors like you talked about, mentoring organization, faith-based organizations, and people that have come from the culture of violence or gangs, or the gang outreach advocates who are now fully committed to saving souls, saving individuals. If we believe this is a value, we will invest in it. And so what I'm suggesting is a strategic tool is that we build the infrastructure to support these three silos of energy together, the mentoring, the faith-based, the gang outreach, such that we can go and help the police even understand these issues as well. They may all look alike to the police. We don't know. And let's stop racializing these arguments. Let's stop as us versus the police and this trust stuff. Let's truly work together. So these discussions we're having now with people that I see here and faith-based folks, they are occurring as we speak. Government can't do it alone. It's going to take this full village to come together. I tell you, the stakes are a little different now. We're living in a different time. So I think we have to try a different form of outreach altogether.
I would second everything that's been said up to this point. Something on a little bit more concrete level, the agency I work for has been selected to open a crisis diversion center that will actually not only serve Seattle, it will serve all of King County. And a crisis diversion center is a therapeutic alternative for first responders, police and fire, that are encountering people in behavioral health crises in the community. Historically, their only dispositioning resources were the King County Jail or an emergency department at Harborview, primarily. This will hopefully be something different, something that will offer clients not simply a revolving door, but entry point to seriously begin to work on long-term issues, connectivity, well, crisis stabilization first, but then connectivity to long-term psychiatric or drug alcohol treatment and housing if they're homeless folks. So that supposed to be open sometime around the 1st of August.
One concrete thing we're doing in the South End, which is where we've seen a lot of the violence recently, is we're, through the Mayor's Office support and SPD, we're able to bring up some capacity building and training for neighborhood folks who want to get involved in sort of neighborhood safety teams and learning more about how to be a connecting force on the street, to get to know the people who are out on the street, to get to know the young people. So it's not about policing the area, it's about reconnecting and being there as a support and additional eyes on the street to help maintain safety. And then quickly, I would just say that supporting existing initiatives and organizations who are doing the work is really is a way that everybody can get involved. And in the report on the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative that's in the lobby on page 18 begins a very long list of partners, all of whom have contributed to helping to prevent violence, and any of whom would be thrilled to have your support as a volunteer or a donor.
Sure. Obviously, we address this at the front end, how we deploy our officers, how many officers we put out on patrol, and where is something we're focusing on. There's crime prevention efforts in collaboration with the feds, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. That's ongoing. So there's the enforcement and prosecution side. But additionally, what we're looking at is I've asked my department heads to come back to me to get back to your summer question. What can we do within our existing resources this summer to reprioritize the work we're doing, whether it's human services, parks, Office of Economic Development, or otherwise, to try to, in the near term, take action. Mariko mentioned the Natural Guardian training, which is the community training on how communities can come together in terms of trying to identify and get at the root causes of violence and reweave the community. We're speaking about the volunteer efforts as well. I just want to say one thing more. Listening to my colleagues on this panel, every one of whom has devoted their time and efforts to making our community safer, better, trying to make sure that people have the opportunity to be who they are. I'm just immensely proud to be mayor of a city with people like you and the folks that have come out. Again and again, we have seen that people in Seattle step up and take personal responsibility to make a difference. So I just want to thank all of you for coming out. I hope you heard something here tonight, that'll spur you to take action, that'll figure out how you can engage to make a difference, because this is a solution that requires all of us. This is a problem that requires all of us to find a solution. So thank you all for coming out and putting your energy into this as well.
Thank you, Mayor McGinn. Danny, do you want to go on record for, I told you I wouldn't ask this, but are you going to go on record for something you're going to commit to increase the peace in Seattle?
Oh, increase the peace. Well, I saw a number of comments came in that we never really got to, which is that we don't have enough cops in this city. And so I have felt that for a long time, that if you look at the staffing formulas for a city this big, we actually have a very small police force. So supporting that is good. Personally, what I'm going to keep doing is telling stories, because I think telling stories is how we live, right? So that's my personal vow.
Thank you. So thanks, Danny, for co-hosting with me, and to all of the panelists for making the time to be here and being committed to this issue in your day-to-day lives as well. In the beginning of the program, I quoted Martin Luther King Jr. from his "Where Do We Go From Here" speech. And here's the end of that quote. "Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." And for the past 2 weeks here at Town Hall, we've shown a spotlight, a literal spotlight we have in one of the dressing rooms in back, on the location in our parking lot where Gloria Leonidas was killed. We were inspired to do that by the words of Dr. King, and it wasn't for any kind of big public thing. It was just something that we wanted to do to help remind ourselves how to stay hopeful despite the powerless that we felt as a staff and an organization. And so we called our modest installation "Only Light" as a way to remember the power of hope and love. Last week, a total stranger placed 1,000 paper cranes, peace cranes, around the building. And when it rained, we gathered those up, and we have them at the memorial right now, also as a way to remind us of what's important. So tonight, we thought it appropriate with all of you here to transform that memorial for Gloria and to make it something that we take with us in each of our separate lives, in our neighborhoods, and our families. So I want to invite you, as we're leaving tonight, first to come outside to that location. You can walk around to the west side of the building, opposite the freeway. You can walk down Seneca, or you can come down this side. And there, take a paper crane, a flower, or just an intention to go into your community and do something worthwhile, whether it's hug your family, talk to a neighbor, or a stranger. Policy and even public gatherings like this can only take us so far. In the end, it might just be up to me and you to make it happen. So thanks again to everyone for attending, also to our Seattle Channel audience for tuning in, and I wish everybody a good night. See you outside.